From the Matrix Home Solutions studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560 The Answer online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. Only the biggest stories, only the biggest guests, and only the biggest opinions. This is AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. The casualties from the war on police continue to mount, both on the civilian and the police side. Over the weekend, New Jersey cancer nurse knocked down by a deranged homeless mugger in Times Square. She died Saturday after clinging to life for a day and a half. Remember when Giuliani cleaned up Times Square? What a change that was for New York City. Now it's
back
reverting.
It's back to its old ways.
You heard it. Mike Scott reported. We mentioned it as well. A Georgia police officer ambushed and killed on his first day on the job.
Left behind a wife and a 6-month-old baby.
Yeah, Louisiana State Trooper, same thing. And a related story, because it speaks to the culture that is at least in part giving rise to this. The kid who shot up Timberview High School in Arlington, Texas, last week, injuring 4 people, including a teacher, he was released.
What?
He is on home confinement after posting $75,000 bond at Tarrant County Jail. So his parents put up $7,500, and they get to take him home after he shot up a school. His defense attorney, saying it wasn't a standard issue school shooting, whatever the hell that means.
What does that mean?
I don't know.
And his family had a welcome home party for him. Oh, and they posted pictures of it. What idiots.
You shot up a school? That used to be a serious offense. For more on this, pleased to be joined by Jason Johnson. He's a former deputy commissioner of the Baltimore Police Department and now heads up the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. Jason, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good to be with you. Morning.
So, I guess start on the law enforcement side. Those 2 officers murdered over the weekend, and I haven't seen the stats recently, but the incidents between the incidents involving an officer as the target or victim of a shooting versus the incidents nationally of an officer involved in a shooting. I'd be interested to bump those stats up, since there's so much obsession anytime there's an officer-involved shooting, and very little attention, a passing news cycle when there's an officer who has either been shot at or, in the case of these 2 officers over the weekend, shot and killed.
Yeah, I mean, clearly there's a mismatch in the public and media interest between the two. We don't, unfortunately, the data on that's a little bit lagging. I can tell you that the number of times that police officers use their firearm has been going down for decades. I mean, pretty significantly. For example, in the early 70s, just looking at our nation's largest law enforcement agency, the NYPD, in 1973, officers discharged their firearms at a person over 900 times. In 2019, guess what that number was? It was 35. So
35 in a city of 8 million people. Yeah.
Yeah. So, contrary to popular belief, police officers are significantly more restrained in use of force, rarely use force. 99.9% of calls for service for police officers result in 0 force. So, yeah, that is all trending down very sharply. And crime, clearly, including violence directed at law enforcement, is up precipitously, really, in cities, across the country.
And what we have here in Chicago is Kim Fox, our prosecutor, non-prosecutor, who now, if you have mutual combat, that's what it's called, like these rolling shootouts when you shoot at each other, they're not charging people because they're claiming it's self-defense.
It would be unacceptable in most places to say that because people are shooting at one another, there's no criminal culpability, or that somehow mutual combatants is a reason why it's not a crime. Think about all the people on the street that weren't involved, that easily could have been shot. A child could have been shot. Anything could have happened. To think that there's no criminal component or no criminal liability is absurd. And, I think for once, maybe for the only time, I land squarely in the Mayor Lori Lightfoot camp on this one.
Well, yeah, as if their camps are that distinctive. They're really not. But too, I mean, we have this novel mutual combatant theory. We have the novel theory, apparently, that was enough to get this kid bonded out who shot up his high school. Non-standard school shooting. So now we're going to have categories of school shootings. When is it? It's not good, but it's not terrible to shoot up a school, injure 4 people, including a teacher.
Yeah, and you should point out too that this student who did the shooting, from what I understand, is an adult. I mean, we're not talking about a 13-year-old.
He's 18.
We're talking about an 18-year-old man who happens to be in a school shooting up a school, and yet he's out walking the streets.
And one of the persons he injured is in the hospital in an induced coma. So he's not, out of the woods per se. So why in the world would they let him go free?
At a $75,000 bond, less. Yeah.
There's been this push now for years for letting people out pre-trial without bail, not really not detaining anyone. And over and over and over, not only in this case, but in so many other cases across the country, we've seen the results of that. We had just here in my hometown, Annapolis, Maryland, we had the national story, a mother dropping off her son at the United States Naval Academy just this fall, late summer. And while she was in her hotel, she was completely, innocent, minding her own business, dropping her son off at the Naval Academy. And some person who's got a lengthy criminal record, has been involved in shootings and drugs and gang activity, is out on home detention from a previous gun charge, is shooting at another guy, misses him, and hits her, kills her. So, and this is just another case of, we're not recognizing we have dangerous people that have to be detained, kept away from the public. And when they're not, the results are tragic.
And then it's not just violent crime, although that's preeminent concern, understandably, but it's quality of life and other sorts of crime too. That's just the police, in addition to prosecutors, have walked away from it. In fact, it's sort of a symbiotic. Police for funding reasons and prosecutors for ideological reasons. In Austin, public has been told not to call 911 for non-emergency situations if there's no immediate threat to life or property, where crimes are no longer in progress, where the suspects are no longer on scene or in sight. This applies to burglaries, thefts, prostitution, vandalism, and several other crimes. They're supposed to call 311. Well, over the last couple of years, the Austin City Council has effectively reduced the police budget by almost half. And so the chief there in Austin says it's a resource issue.
Yeah, and Dan, I would just point out that in Austin, it's not just the budget that's driving it, although they were defunded to some degree. It's that Austin police officers are walking away as never before from their jobs. They're leaving law enforcement, or they're certainly leaving the Austin Police Department. Retirements in that city are up 65% since the George Floyd riots. Resignations from the Austin Police Department are up 63%. It is right now, it really is the poster child for the dangers of this dangerous disempowerment rhetoric, defunding of law enforcement. It's resulting in massive attrition in the police department. They've elected a prosecutor that potentially would even make Kim Foxx blush in terms of how he exercises his discretion in Jose Garza. He's charging cops left and right, but not charging anyone else. And homicides are up. I don't have my finger on the number, but I think it's up 50% or 60% in Austin since the George Floyd riots.
Right, and with respect to that, I mean, you have other communities actually advertising in Austin for Austin police officers. That's how significant the exodus. I saw one story about Spokane, Washington, targeting Austin police officers, saying, "Come to Spokane."
It's bad when their Spokane is drawing people away from Austin. So.
Yeah, well, this shooting that happened over the weekend in St. Paul, Minnesota, too, where 15 people were shot outside of a nightclub. The the sheriff there, I guess, his name is Bob Fletcher. He actually predicted something bad was going to happen the night before it did. he just because of the crowd, the gatherings that were happening, I guess in the downtown area where this bar is located. He said before the shooting, we've never had any shots fired, but I hope we never do. But this volume of people, at some point, it's going to happen, right? And he talked about his 3 decades plus in law enforcement, and he said you get to read crowds and how they act towards you and how they act towards each other. And he's talking about just sort of just the nature of the dynamic between so many urban denizens, particularly young people, and police that make these city centers real powder kegs.
There's no question about it. There's also no question that the police have been in really in every city. It doesn't matter what city you're talking about. It's all virtually the same story. The police have been disempowered. They cannot act to prevent crime in the ways that they could before. Those tactics they've used are now, verboten, and they can't use it. Prosecutors in these cities, so mostly Soros-funded prosecutors, aren't prosecuting criminals, and so they're out on the street. There's no accountability for what they do, and the police literally are handcuffed. And first of all, they're fighting massive staffing challenges. Every city, including Chicago. With attrition up, recruitment down, and the officers that remain are really unable to do anything about this uptick in violence. The cases they bring aren't being prosecuted, and if forbid they get involved in some use of force while they're trying to prevent crime, they become the target rather than the the gangbangers. And so we're not in a good place.
Is any you rose to the rank of Deputy Commissioner of the Baltimore Police Department, as mentioned at the outset. Is there anybody in these big cities, north of 1 million people, north of 500,000 people, all controlled by Democrat socialists? Is there anybody listening and saying, we cannot continue to do this. We cannot continue to not prosecute criminals. We cannot continue to defang and defund police. We have to sort of get back to things that are commonsensical that we know work. Is there anybody engaging that conversation with police officers, the unions, anybody?
Well, certainly the unions, virtually all police unions have.
Well, I know the unions are, engaging them, like the politicians engaging them.
Yeah. No politicians that I'm aware of, but you're starting to see some senior executives in law enforcement start to become more vocal about it. Even Superintendent Brown in Chicago has been vocal about the need to get back to more traditional sorts of law enforcement. Chief Conti in D.C. has been, I think, rather famously, he's had a number of press conferences where he's made it very clear that we've got to stop coddling criminals. We've got to hold them accountable in the traditional ways that we have in the past. And really, what I see this small groundswell of mostly African American police chiefs starting to speak out because they're in the best position to do it. A white police chief in many cities would be canceled just for suggesting that criminals should potentially actually be held accountable, which is just absurd to think about, but it's the truth. So you're starting to see some of these black police chiefs step up and really be more vocal. We really need more of that. Not less.
He is Jason Johnson, former Deputy Commissioner of the Baltimore Police Department, now heads up the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. Jason, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The stories you need to know to start your day. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Are you growing your manufacturing team this year and need new employees? Turn to Monarch Technical Services in Rolling Meadows.